So we are thrilled to have with us today John Whalley here to talk about his new exhibition, Earth Tones. John Whalley's paintings go well beyond mere technique. They are in the tradition of American realists while acknowledging the Dutch masters. His work exudes tremendous warmth, luminosity, and charm. He responds to what he calls the beauty that speaks softly. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, and currently lives in Mid-Coast, Maine. He received his BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design. His work is in numerous private, national, and international collections, including the Portland Museum of Art, the Colby College Museum of Art, the Georgia Museum of Art, the Otto Naumann Collection in New York, and the Alfred Bader Collection in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, just to name a few. His publications include John Whalley, American Realist, published in 2001, and John Whalley in New Light, a 30-year retrospective book of drawings and paintings, published in 2006. In addition, John has been featured on the television show Bill Green's Maine in 2008. I will now turn it over to John Whalley.
I'll echo what John said, and thank you all for coming by today and watching us here live. And for those who will be looking on the Greenhut website later, welcome to you as well, and thanks for tuning in. I'm really grateful for this show that came together as nicely as it did this last year. I called it Earth Tones for a couple of reasons. I know a show is coming up and I'm looking at getting together maybe 20 or so works. I like to have a theme of some kind, and this year, I think the theme I had just about a year ago now was the idea of revisiting some landscapes that I had wanted to do. I had been away from landscape for a while. Years ago, I did some very large 6 by 4 foot landscapes that I really loved, and I just had kind of a yearning to go back and do them in graphite. So I thought, well, that's a portrait of the earth, a landscape, earth tones. And then I realized that the palette in my paintings that I was gravitating toward were more into the earths like burnt sienna and the umbers and the ochres. And I thought, fine, there's another link to earth tones. So you'll notice in the show a lot of the range of color is in the earth range with some highlights from the other parts of the spectrum. So that's where the title for the show came up. And the theme is similar to what I've done all along over the last 15, 20 years. The theme kind of came up for me, the idea of orphaned objects. And in a little bit, I'll show you a few pictures from our studio where it's like a repository for thousands of objects we've picked up at yard sales, flea markets, and given them a home, and then they make their ways into my paintings. And I love taking things that, as Jimmy Carter said in one of his books, he quoted this: "Art is best derived from artless things." And I really think there's a truth to that. I love stories where the least expected person in the story becomes the hero. That something is seen in them that the obvious, you wouldn't see obviously, but it's in there, and the story brings out that quality of the person, or a change that takes place in the person. But in any case, a lot of the objects I include in this show are old, worn, repaired, that have a story to tell, and the patinas and the obvious use that they've been through over the years. And this is a chance for them to have a second life, kind of saved from the trash bin in a way. And I just love that theme. I always have a redemption. You think of a lot of the stories and the myths and I'm thinking of like a movie like Les Miserables, where the man in the beginning of the movie who is the least likely candidate for anything heroic winds up becoming the hero of the story. And so I think that theme touches me deeply on a spiritual level, on a lot of levels. And so I'm really happy that I can include that in some of the work in the show as well. I also wanted to introduce you to the media I use, because a lot of questions people have are like, how do you get that effect with graphite or egg tempera? What is egg tempera? Some people say it's egg tempura, and I say, no, I'm not planning on eating the paintings. They're actually there to be seen. So I thought I'd show you, we'll start with egg tempera, since I have this up here. And there are a few paintings in this exhibit, this being one of them here, which you could probably see at an angle. It's done on a panel that's been prepared. I do it at home with the old technique of the masters where they take rabbit skin glue, which don't worry, it's not made from rabbits, it's an organic gelatin basically, and mix it with water over heat till it's dissolved, and then you add marble dust, or what they call whiting, precipitated chalk. And it makes a beautiful, thick, creamy white paint, and you put layer upon layer on the board, 5 to 8 layers, and then when it dries fully, sand it down, and you get this beautiful, like, white slate to paint on. Then, and I can swing this around, probably easier here. Sorry, I undid what I said I was going to do. I have some pictures here that in the morning when I'm doing egg temper paintings, by the kitchen sink, I take a bowl and crack an egg in the baby food jar. And then you basically let the egg white come out. You pass the yolk from side of the shell to side of the shell till the yolk is till the egg white is in the bowl, which usually becomes part of breakfast. And then you take the yolk and put it in your hand. And it's very slimy, so you can't do anything with it in terms of picking it up. So what you do is you pass it from one hand to another, and then you dry your hand off from the hand that you had just had it in. And finally, it becomes quite dry on the outside, and you even can dampen it with a little paper towel. And then you pick it up, and unfortunately, this one broke before I got the picture taken, but believe me, it was suspended there, and then you puncture the bottom, and take the yolk, the pure yolk, in the baby food jar, and then you add a little distilled water. And that becomes the medium, about 50% water to 50% yolk. And with a baby eyedropper, you mix that with the dried pigments. And these are just a few dried pigments. Here's a nice earth tone. This is yellow ochre. And I had a friend in Georgia send me a jar of ochre that he got in his backyard where the soil was very full of iron. So, and then sometimes you can get it where it's actually mixed with liquid. You can squirt a little bit in, but you mix that on your palette and then add a bit of egg yolk and water, and that becomes the binder. And then you build up very fine layers of paint. And there's just hundreds of layers of color. So as in a lot of the paintings, there's an underpainting, and then gradually the outer skin of the objects comes on over that, and you can see a lot of the undercolor coming through, and it's just a beautiful technique. It has a very dry quality to it. The other technique I was going to explain was my graphite drawings, and this is one behind me. You can see a large landscape. And if you were here in person, you could go up very close and see the marks, which are, this was about 4 to 5 weeks working at least a 40-hour day. And a lot of the time at the table is spent literally just making microscopic marks. But another way you can apply graphite is, this is number 0000 stained steel wool. And I have, you can buy graphite powder, which you can put in a bowl, and then you can dip this in there, and actually, in something real fine gray like that, you can rub it in very gently and develop some very, very soft, beautiful grays with that. This is a stump that you can do some value with. And then you can remove things with a kneaded eraser. You can make a very fine line for removing some graphite and actually drawing lights back into the darks. But most of the work, like I said, was with a pencil, developing very, very, very fine detail and rendering things. And that's what, for me, takes most of the time. It's when things get really close, I can wear these, which are conservators' glasses for very, the older I get, the more I wear these, let's put it that way. And yeah, so that's the media there. And my oil painting, to be honest, I use it a lot like egg temper, where I put underpainting layers down and build up glazes of color over that. So there's many times, many paintings, one over another. And I'll show you, as we look at some specific paintings, some changes that happen during the way. That's the media I use. What I'd like to show you in terms of how these pieces come to be in the first place. Knowing a show is coming up, I begin to think to myself, like, what's going to be the theme? And one of the ways, and my wife Ellen is here with me today, we go into the studio, and this is, I'll do this again for you, this will be much easier. Sorry. These are some of the shelves in the studio, and it's organized pretty well in terms of nature objects. These are watch faces and the gears for watches, and these are the cameras, different things that interest us as objects. And then there's shelves that I've arranged, some shelves by color and some by function, like different tools. This is like the white section, and there's a lot of bones and baseballs. And down here are like 100-something nozzles. I got addicted to nozzles for a while, so that's how that happened. But anyhow, these are all like train locks. And in the show, I'll show you a drawing I did of a train lock, but we have a real large selection of these. Tinware. The light that falls on tinware is just marvelous, so I really got into collecting that and doing drawings of that. These are old tins, which again are arranged in a spectrum of color, because when you're developing a still life, you have a palette of items and colors to work from, and it's wonderful. And you can look around the room and just choose the right object. And when you have enough of one thing, you really can find the perfect object for that particular still life. This is the yellow range. I chose a couple from this section for the earth tone show. And these are oil cans and old amber bottles. Yeah, that's it. And that's a little glimpse of the studio. There's a lot more, but as in setting up a still life, it's wonderful having that broader range of objects that you can play with one against another, and it takes hours and hours and hours to come up with compositions that'll work. And you can always tweak it and improve it, the composition. Yeah, so the process of selecting objects is usually spending some time going around the studio and looking at all that's there, and usually a certain object or two just grabs my attention, and then you start to say, what would be an environment that I could place this in that would bring out the real beauty that's in there, and what other objects might I assemble with that, or what backgrounds could we use, and then the actual posing is usually done like with still life, like the light comes in the back windows, and a couple of tricks a friend taught me was, one is you get a translucent shower curtain, and if you have a direct light source like sunlight or a lamp, you can stretch that in front of it and it diffuses the light beautifully. Or what works for me almost better is to take fine sandpaper and get yourself a big sheet of plexiglass and sand it. And you wind up with a translucent set that can go in front of the sunlight or a lamp, and it gives a soft, beautiful light. Some still lights call for actual direct sunlight or more direct focused light, but many of them I just love that soft light. The other one is backgrounds, and you'll notice in a lot of the still lifes where they're like, I call them picture stories, where there's a couple of objects sitting on an old board or a surface of an old plaster's, I don't know what they call it. It's something that they put the plaster on while they're working with it, and it has a beautiful old patina, old flooring. We have a whole collection of surfaces that we have drug home, metal, sheets of old metal, and or an old book, an old big book could make a beautiful background texture. Those are things I consider and play with, and again, it takes a lot of time to look at all the possibilities and finally come to the one that you feel like is really doing the object justice. The other thing in the process is allowing, as the paintings develop, not telling the painting what it's going to be, not having a solid idea of where it's going, but allow the painting room to kind of lead you a little bit and maybe change the direction you went in, change the colors, change things that, you know, a lot of times I'll be partway through a painting and it's just not quite right, and I give it some time, and sure enough, a better path develops as I let the painting have enough space to talk back. And along those lines, what I usually do is start about 6 to 10 pieces at the same time and get them all underway, and then come into the studio in the morning and gravitate toward the piece that I think I'm most motivated to work on that day, and take it as far as I can, and then let it rest and work on another one. What's nice with that is that you, when you get away from a painting, you come back to it with fresh eyes, and I find that having a group of things that I'm bringing along together, they kind of inform each other, and some of the things you learn in one you can apply to another. And I find sometimes if I'm pushing one painting to its completion, by the end you really are like, it's a labor of labor as opposed to a labor of love. And this way I can come in and I can work on a piece that really grabs me that day. So I find for me that's the thing that really works. And some people ask, how long do these pieces take? And mine tend to take a lot of time. I haven't found shortcuts to speak of. It's usually, I love texture, I love detail, I love reworking things. So they really, like this drawing behind me was at least a month drawing on it pretty much all the time. So they can be 150 hours, 200 hours in some of the drawings. The paintings, it really does vary, but usually it's a lot of time. So with that in mind, what I thought I would do is start over here on this side of the gallery, and we can look at a graphite drawing to begin with. And this is a portrait I did of an old train lock, and I actually have the lock here. I brought some of these objects in today because a lot of people are interested in seeing what I worked from, and many times to see how what I worked from doesn't bear complete resemblance to what I wound up with, because I do let things kind of get a life of their own. But that's the lock there. And I was able to get a light on that for me really brought out the beautiful patina of this warm metal and the icy coldness of it. And in this case here, I would mix graphite powder with rubber cement thinner, which made a very loose, watery liquid that you could splatter. And when it dried on the paper immediately, it left these marks of being splattered. So it can replicate this look of an old wall in an old train station, say where this was hung up on the wall. And then this, sometimes you can remove some of the gray to get a band of lighter color by using tape or something that removes it. So that's that one. And then, to do that, I went through 100 locks or more to finally wind up with the lock that was calling out to me the most. And this has a softball, a very old softball that's leather, and very, very old. It has a real shine to it. And I noticed that when I was holding this in the light of the studio, it was a very warm color, but from out of the surface of that, where the light from the window was hitting, it was a beautiful blue. It was like a contrast between the warm and the blue, and cool blue. And this was a small old book I had that I thought the proportion was interesting because it looks like it should be a very large book, but it's quite small compared to this, so it made this seem even bigger. And so I posed it on the other window on an old board with a background of an old board, and used it as a chance to pick up some of those cool colors, as well as here there were these beautiful blues in here that were caught, and then the warm reflected light. And I also loved how the rosy color of the string changed as it went around. So it was a study for me of the light, the texture, and these were the objects that kind of inspired that piece. And that was done in oil. And this is a graphite of, I call it the teacher because I've kept in touch with a teacher I had when I was a boy, and she's very old now, but that's not a picture of her, but we have hundreds of pictures we've collected over the years, Ellen and I, and when I saw this, it just reminded me a lot of her. So I took that as a little homage to her. And in terms of selection, I talked about selecting things in the studio. I brought some, these are just some of them, but these are, in junk shops, we always find these junky old chalkboards from years gone by, some with the slate, some without. And I brought these along to show you some of the options that were available. And I've used these in other pieces. There we go. That was a contender. But I wound up going with the one that's actually over there, I think, but it's, oh, I think I have it over here. This is the chalkboard I wound up going with, which I guess is, I remember when I was a kid, the reason I chose this also was when I was a kid, it was the end of the time when they actually used an abacus to teach you math. So she taught me on an abacus, so it was a perfect match for that. And then this is the photograph we found in a junk shop from the early 1900s. So I put that there against an old board we have at home and included a tin cup with a pine cone in it. And took a long time to come up with that final composition. We had all kinds of things going on, but I tried to reduce it to something that just brought back the feeling I had toward the woman and her place. And so there you go. And she was also always standing in front of a chalkboard, so that seemed really appropriate. And then coming over here, I'll do this one first. Probably everybody knows that in the last couple decades, the bee population has been at peril because of a whole list of things: insecticides, encroachment from civilization, a whole lot of reasons, chemicals in the environment. And people are aware of it now, so they're starting to do things to alleviate that. But with that in mind, I was visiting a friend with Ellen who raises bees. And she took me in her back room, and she had a bunch of these racks, which are called frames. Thank you, Ellen. I always call them racks, and they're frames. So these are the frames she had, and I just fell in love with the, if you see these, they're little miracles. It's unbelievable to think a community of little insects could make such a thing. It's amazing. So I was in love at first sight, and I said I have to do a painting of them. And then I found an old book called The ABC of Bee Culture, and this is the cover. And the painting proceeded along with this being the color palette. And I worked, and I can't tell you, I see why it takes a colony now, because I spent endless hours on this comb, and the hours would just go by. And so finally, I finished it, I thought, and let it rest and worked on some other pieces. And when I came back one night, I realized it needed something other than the same color range as the panel itself. So I changed the color of the book to one of my favorite colors, and it just made the piece for me. So that's called the ABC of Bees Culture. So it's, and then this one is a painting I did of 3 forks. We have many, many forks we've collected. This one had been repaired with old twine where the ivory had cracked, or the bone had cracked, not ivory. And they're quite old. And then I had an old English grammar book. So, and this is on an old breadboard that I used for the background. And what was nice about this was the blue of the light falling on those forks just sung to me when you placed it in that warm environment. And here, thank you. Yeah. Got this place we have all these objects all over the place here. And these are the objects. And maybe you can see, but I make up a lot of the colors. It's like you see them hinted at in the piece itself. but I kind of sometimes will let the colors go in a little bit of different direction to bring out what I'm looking for in terms of the light reflection. So I really love those staying accurate to what's there, but when it comes to color, I let things happen. And a lot of times really nice surprises happen. And that's another thing that works in the artist's favor, these wonderful, happy chances that come along that you're working, and these surprises happen. So this piece here is a graphite drawing based on it's partly made up. We found in a junk shop this old, torn up, shredded picture of a farm pond which has some of this in it. Half of it was missing, but there was enough of it there that I just love the basic composition. And we have a lot of fields, farm fields near us. So there's a lot of textures and things I could find locally and added things. And this became partly imagined, partly based on this very accurate, old but shredded photograph. So this is a Maine farm pond, and we have one over near us in Ulna that actually was in my mind when I was working on this. So, and it took a long time. And this too is a graphite, small still life with a couple of apples and grapes. And this is an old tin that's over there, but we've had that in the family for a long time. So that was just kind of a personal little study. And this one is called Bertha because this envelope we found, among many envelopes we found, is from 1908, and it was addressed to Bertha. And she lived here in Maine, and it was sent from Austria. And so, oh no, I'm sorry, it was sent to Austria from a woman here in Maine. And we have a letter at home. And I love this. I just love the calligraphy, the markings of this. Everything together was just wonderful. So I held that apart and I said, when I have a show coming up, I'm going to include this. And then I had this little picture that to me was Bertha. I just thought, that's Bertha right there. And then we included a spool of thread. My imagination started going as to who this woman might have been, and a little pocket watch she may have had with her, and posted on the background of an old door. But that's where just the story begins to just develop in my mind, and it's like writing a little short story about someone who you really never knew. And Ellen was saying this morning that, you know, it's not only orphaned objects, but there's it's orphaned moments. These old photographs we find are one of a kind, and they had once been in somebody's collection here in Maine, and so we have literally probably thousands of these old photographs. And it's so nice to include them sometimes because that was somebody, and whoever they were related to is probably gone as well. So it's nice to include them and just create a little story about them, kind of honor them that way. So that was that piece. Then we'll come over here. And this is a long landscape. It took me longer than anything for the show. This was one of those ones that just kept going and going, and I got more and more lost in detail. And this is a cornfield in the late winter, and spring is around the corner, but this is the stubble from the previous year that I think you'll agree is just beautiful to stand in a field like that and just watch just the flow of like a river of corn stubble and the direction. It just takes you right in. And I spent a lot of time walking through that particular field, and I always wanted to do a portrait of it. So this is combined with some imagery from here in Maine, where we had gone up near Skowhegan to some big cornfields that were kind of doing the same thing. And this particular field is based on a field that I knew in Pennsylvania. And then I kind of extrapolated from there to give it the weather that it had, and just let it be all about the pattern and the markings. So if you do see it in real life, it took forever. I'll just say that. It took forever to draw all that, but it was so pleasing when it was done. So, and this is also a very detailed piece that was from, we frequently go down to New Harbor, and there's a if you go down there, there's a fisherman's shed, and this door is facing the water. And one gray afternoon, I just looked at it, and it was just a feast of texture. And so I took some pictures of it, and then I came home and I posed 3 shovels behind the house that I wanted to place in the setting of that door, just to kind of complete the whole idea of it. Tell a little bit more of a story than just the door itself. And then once you get drawing, you can add texture, you play around with it, and just let your imagination go. But this took quite a lot of time to draw as well. And then this is my lovely assistant is handing me this. Thank you, Ellen. Oops. We have a very light part of this composition. This is an old tin. We have quite a big number of these. An old tin, Edgeworth tobacco tin from the 1800s. And this is one of about 150 cards that my father collected when he was a young boy in about the 1930s. When you bought Church and Company baking soda made by Arm & Hammer. And every time you bought a can of, or a box of these baking soda, you got one of these in it. So I don't know what they were doing with the baking soda. My grandmother must have been addicted to it, because he has over 150 of these things. But they're beautiful. On the back, they tell you all about the bird. This side, they have beautiful aquatints of these birds, and one's prettier than the next. So I love these things, and I've done paintings of these before. In any case, I included this against this beautiful little tin with a small feather below here. And I just let that be obviously a memory of my dad, and just the color, the blue. I love the blue, and against the earth tones, it was just really nice. And just to let that develop and just study, try to do an aquatint by myself. And that's an egg temper where you build up layers and layers and layers of color. And the background of this went through many changes, but finally arrived at that tone. What's nice about egg temper, by the way, is you don't have to worry that you've, in a sense, made a mistake, because you can do another layer of paint over it. And sometimes your quote-unquote mistakes are embedded in the texture that wind up giving it much more of a beauty than if you had not made the mistake. So that's one thing that I really love about the egg tempera. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, we're getting near the end here, folks. This is a still life. And a few years ago, I was commissioned to do a portrait of sourdough bread for the Parados Library of Sourdough Bread in Belgium, believe it or not. They have a wonderful library with the starters for sourdoughs from around the world. So I was privileged to do this nice portrait, and having done that, I really fell in love with the texture of sourdough bread. So I've done a number of portraits of bread since then. This is a loaf here, and this is the bottle that we've had in my family forever. And these are 2 little loaves, which are edible at this point, and the old knife. And again, what I loved in this was that cool, reflected light, as well as the cool that showed up in the flour on the bread here. It was beautiful, that cool, and a little bit of cool light falling on there, while the general light was this warm, warm light. This stuff was able to happen because of the cold window down below. So it was a nice balance of the two. And even the edge of this wood here had some beautiful light purples and blues. So that's oil. And again, you can see the underpainting was very, very bright, and then toning it down, and then just adding layer upon layer gave the final effect there. So thank you very much. Great. All right, and this one is a pencil drawing of a forest walk. And where I lived once, there was this forest that you walked through, but to get from this end to that end, you had to go through a very dark cavern. And the only light was coming down from way above. And I had lived out of the country once, and there was a very similar forest, a plantation, the trees were planted like this, very straight, very, very close, which made it like nighttime in the middle of this forest in the middle of the day. So Ellen and I in our explorations found a box full of old little black and white photographs from who knows when, very old. And one little tiny one was similar to this. So I kind of made a composition that would be kind of abstract, but to capture that sense of a road that is going off through the darkness, and the only thing that can guide you is this light coming down from above. And I call it the way home. And you know, it just spoke to a place in my life where I'm at, and it's, I just really love I could play with the textures of the trees, and being very familiar with these evergreens and the texture of the road, and I was very happy with that. It just gave me a good feeling as that developed. And the last of the landscapes are this one, which is right up the street from our house in Noblesboro. Behind you, if you're standing here, behind you is the Great Salt Bay that we live on. And up over the road there's this field where there's usually about 6 to 8 cows wandering around there. And they raise hay there. They mow it a couple times a year. And this was this last April. I went out for a walk and it had snowed about 2 or 3 inches maybe. And I went by the field and there were these beautiful trails going off of the tire ruts. And that we had just enough snow to just describe all of these little beautiful details. And then the water, being springtime, this water is running down across there. So you have this beautiful movement going back, then you have this happening here, and it was a very gray day and I wanted to capture that. So this is where I used the steel wall to cover the entire surface with graphite, and then used the eraser to erase out some of the whites, and then drew into the gray with the darker darks. And I wanted it to capture some of that like almost quiet, foggy, almost gray spring day, just when the last snowfall of the year. So, and then there's a little fence here that's ticketing along there. It's just wonderful. I love that scene. It's a joy to go by it every time we drive by it. So, and then right here, this last piece here on this wall is called Summer Memory. And there's a little pouch, leather pouch, which probably held someone's little keepsake. And we found this little picture of this woman who was wearing a beautiful hat. And I bought this because I loved her hat and said, I think I'm going to do a portrait of her sometime. And I did, and decided a shell would be appropriate, picturing her out for a walk on the beach sometime. And in the background, I made kind of a dark gray with some of the color of this beautiful earth tone coming through the gray in places. So it was as much about just a beautiful color composition as it was her. And I exaggerated the warmth of the photograph. And as well as the shell, I got that a little more pink. So that's what went into that one. And this piece is called The House Next Door, this graphite, and it's literally the house next door. We look out on this every day. And it's been falling over for a number of years. We watch it by degrees, falling almost into the bay. And thankfully, a young couple just bought it, and they are restoring it, and it's straight as can be now. And anyhow, this was last fall in the late sunlight of the day, just hit it beautifully after the leaves fell, and I just fell in love with that. So started a sketch of that, and this developed into this small portrait of a beautiful house. The bones of that house are just lovely, and the lighting is like a sculpture up in the hill. I'm so glad they're not going to tear it down. I was afraid they were going to. All right, and this one is called The Odd Couple, for obvious reasons. And this is the subject I used. It's an old, you can see it, an old book, which I think says Mr. S. Cole. And these are 2 brushes we picked up that are repaired and used and just really seen, they've done their duty. And this book has also done its duty since it's falling apart, an English grammar book. It's pretty much needs some restoration, but it was a beautiful background for that. And of course, I did my thing on the colors. I decided to push it all into a very red range this is an old breadboard that someone had used to tack things on. So there are thousands of little tack holes along with bang marks. And so that became the background. And I just took the whole thing and moved it more and more into the kind of a reddish, kind of almost a glazed, where the color emanates from it. It's not so flat and dry as these colors. I wanted it to glow more. And kind of exaggerated the red of the handle there. Took it from an orange more to a red. And that's what's fun, you know, you're basing things on an actual object, but that doesn't say you have to obey every little nuance of color. You can play with it, and the painting just, and there's a lot, you can't maybe see it, but there's a lot of green in here. I use a lot of green, the opposite of the reddy orange, and a lot of fun. And that changed, that went on forever, that piece. The background kept changing, and I finally did that. So, over here, I believe is the last piece, and this is a piece called The Actress, and my wife is an actress, and we found this photograph, which is here, and I don't know what she did or who she was. There's no saying who. She's from Bangor, no saying when, but I thought she has to be an actor. She has to. She's just so much of a presence in that. I decided to have her be that as an occupation. And this is just a can of, I don't even know what it is, but I thought this is her makeup. This is a can of something else. I don't know what it is. That could be makeup. And then this is just something that might have been on a dresser with some feathers and a leaf. That was just. And this is what I was talking about, the plaster of Paris they would mix on this board. It has a beautiful texture. And this old ruler I have in the background just as an added. And then just to play with the color of the wood and the texture. For me, some of these pieces are just fun. They're a lot of work, but they're just playing with texture. And then you leave it for a few days, come back and you try some blue here and like catching a highlight that was light might be coming through the photograph a bit. And this is egg temper, by the way, so you can really build up some beautiful colors. And what you can do, which you shouldn't if you come in the gallery, but if you take your hand and go like that, there's absolutely no texture. It feels like you're wiping a smooth, clean piece of slate. Egg temper has very little texture to it. Part of that's just technically, if you build it up too thick, too quickly, it'll eventually break and fall off. It really needs to be layer upon layer so that the fat in the egg yolk can cure and become this really durable substance that'll last thousands of years. So that's the end of my description here of the pieces.
Could you stand next to John when you answer his question so the microphone picks him up? Could you stand on that?
Sure. So, we can take any questions people may have.
Yeah, so first question here from Roy. Can you talk about working in each of the different media? Do different subjects ask to be done in one of the media over another?
That's a good question. And that's come up before. How do you decide whether you're going to do a painting in oil or egg tempera? Or when do you decide to do a graphite as opposed to a color piece? And it's mostly intuitive. For me, a lot of times, if there's a dry surface that I really want to capture, egg tempera is such a pleasing way to go. It records texture wonderfully, and it has a dry look to it. Oil is really great at the rich glazing, where you put a darker color over a lighter color, and you get this glow to it. So in general, that would be one thing I consider. I love them both. Egg temper, I think I love a little more. I do. And graphite, I always love graphite. I just love drawing with pencils, always have. So if I do a graphite drawing, then it's usually about texture and darks and lights that are really the strength of the piece. When it comes to photography, I much prefer black and white photography because it just has a timelessness about it. So I love my drawings as much as my paintings. but color certainly has a wonderful thing going for it, so that helps.
When you said the cornfield took forever,
Yes.
do you keep track of how long they take and how long did that one take?
Not exactly, but that was about, as I remember, it was most of 2 months. I worked on that through the winter, and not every day, but most days. And when I did work a day on it, it was a long day. So I'm guessing maybe 200 hours. I thought about that, and I was guessing somewhere around 200 hours was my guess. It just, the texture of that is what, I wanted to stay true to it. You kind of set a certain level in the beginning of a drawing and then you kind of wish you hadn't, because you got half the drawing with this detail and it's like you're running out of steam. I thought I was running a 100-yard dash, and this is like cross country. I signed up for the wrong team. But you stick with it. And the other thing that's important, I just throw in here, is I learned this from someone I knew. If there's a part of the work that is difficult, do it first thing in the day. So what I might do, if I'm having a real struggle with attacking that detail of a drawing again, I'll give it from like maybe 8 o'clock till like 10:30. Then have a coffee, reward myself with a cup of coffee. I need a reward at the end of the period. And then I'll work on a painting. And then the next day I'll work maybe a full day on that. But you work on stuff that you least feel up for first, and then reward yourself with things that you're more excited about. So, but I work a full day. It's just a matter of putting it in the right order so I make the most use of it. So
when you're spending so many hours on one piece, do you find it meditative?
Yes. What's nice, I've had times when Ellen will remember this. I was drawing on a drawing a couple of years ago, and I hadn't seen this man for 20 years. I knew him in Florida, and he was a very nice man, and he had helped me. And in a very nice way. He really bent over backwards to help me, and I hadn't seen him in 20 years. And I got thinking about him while I'm drawing, and then my thoughts kept coming back all morning. And I said, well, this is ridiculous. I have to do something about this. So I looked up, and I guess I found an email for him that still worked. Somehow I had his email. No, I guess I looked it up online, and it was an email from him. And I knew he lived in Florida, and I found where he was. So I called him, I emailed him, and I got an email right back saying, you won't believe it, but my wife and I are on our boat in Tennant's Harbor, right here in Maine. And so we went and had dinner with him that night. And for me to be thinking about him, and he was 20 miles away when he lives in Florida, it was really neat. So I've had some of those moments that have been really kind of neat. So it is very meditative. You sit there. So.
Lauren comments, your portrait work is amazing within the larger pieces. Did you study the portrait technique? Did you study portraiture?
I did mostly. I studied at RISD, and when I was there wasn't a lot of traditional classical training. So I'd spend a lot of the evenings in the library there, and I had books I did of studying them. So and there was a nature lab there doing animal portraits and things. But where Miss Lawrence, who was in her 80s then, she taught more traditional drawing. So yeah, I mean, I've studied a lot of my own over that. Yeah, I kind of wished I had a little more of that classical training when I was young.
William asks, what do you draw on? I think he's just.
Oh, technically, what I draw on is. For a drawing the size of this, say, that's probably, I'm not sure on this one, but for anything under like a sheet of watercolor paper, the last few years I've used Arches hot press watercolor paper, which is very smooth, and it receives the graphite very nicely. For the larger drawings, and maybe for some of the smaller ones, I have a roll of, I was living here in Maine, in Standish in the 1980s for a few years. And I was buying a sheet at an art store that was down here on Pearl Street. I can't remember the name of it, but it was right behind us here. And I would come every month and buy a 6-foot piece of their 52-inch wide Stonehenge paper. It's called Stonehenge. And I did these huge drawings. I did one a month for a gallery in Maryland. And I finally said to myself, he's charging me this much per sheet. What if I ask him how much is on the whole roll and Turns out I was paying 3 times the price as if I bought the whole roll. So I shelled out $1,200 and I bought this roll that stands this high and it's about that big around. And wherever I've lived since then, I have dragged this roll of paper with me. So I use Stonehenge paper for large pieces to this day off the same roll. And if anybody would like some, I think I have enough for everybody in Maine still. But anyhow, it's a very good paper, Stonehenge. You'd really like it. And when you use like different like steel wool or an old dish towel to rub in the graphite, it just has a wonderful quality to it. So.
Sandra asked, do you ever create your portraits in graphite?
Yep. In fact, most of the portraits I've done have been in graphite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've had some.
Yeah, I love graphite for portraits. Although I'm doing one of Ellen right now that's in egg tempera, which I can't wait to finish. So.
Kathy asked a question, when you switch between painting and drawing in the studio, is that a fluid process, or do you have to sort of fully engage with one and fully shut that off?
Yeah, the painting, oil painting is the most where you engage. Because the paint, like with egg tempera, it pretty much, when I mix enough that I use, and then it dries up and you just scrape it off and make a new little batch. With oil, it dries, it gets the skin on it. I like to use it when it's fresh, and it's just, I usually like to extend my time working with oils, but with egg tempera and drawing, I can go back and forth very easily. But with oil, I always have this compulsion. I got to use up the paint. I don't want to waste the paint. Just use it up. So.
Well, other than that reason, I mean, do you find it difficult just switching?
Switching between them? Not really. No, I start a series of pieces, and I have the drawing table at one end of the studio, all set up, ready to go, and then the painting area, and I can switch out very easily. And sometimes it's really nice to paint half a day, draw half a day, and it gives you a freshness with both. So I don't have a problem with that. No.
You talked a little bit about it with some of the graphites, for instance, having that sort of a half picture of the farm. Were the other pieces, are you working from photographs? Or
this one, the one of the door down in New Harbor, I took some pictures of it, but I took a lot of liberty with it, so it's probably half relying on a photograph for some of the basics. And the shovels I had there at the house. This was kind of this little tiny thing that I based it on, and then from some memory information in there, and just doing things to augment the composition and things. And this is up around the corner, and I did take pictures of that day, and again, I put the gray down, so it really didn't follow the photographs well, because I wound up doing a drawing from the dark to the light. And so it's based on, in terms of the information, the photograph helped with some of the information, but I kind of forgo. I didn't put a lot of the detail in of the trees or anything. So it wasn't really literal, but it did help. And sometimes photographs help with lighting. If you have a lighting situation where things are changing very quickly, you can at least capture that, But I like to just stay very loose and see where the painting or drawing goes.
Yeah, can you talk a bit more about the objects you paint generally, and why you collect what you collect? If you're collecting them with the idea that they'll be in the painting, or if there's objects you're collecting.
Well, I wonder about that sometimes. Ellen and I go out to like this side of Wiscasset. There's a Montsweek flea market in the summer. It was, not this summer, but there's antique shops, there's flea markets, barn sales in our area. And when we first met, our first date was going out into an antique store. And when I visited Ellen at her home the first time, she had all of these beautiful still lifes with old objects. And so I felt like I should just move right in. Why wait? It's great. Let me join my stuff with yours, which we eventually did. But so we really love going out to these sales and things, and And we've gotten where we really have curated this room. We don't let very much in anymore that's just okay. It has to be something that on the table of, say, a flea market, this little unique object, you'll know you'll never see it again. The way it was repaired, the uniqueness of it, and it just kind of cries out, take me home, so we do. But I don't do it as quickly as I used to. But we do have what's nice is we have like so many things in every many categories, so it just makes it wonderful to work from. But honestly, it's almost like living in a little museum now, so that I'm wondering, are we really in it for the stuff or the painting of the stuff? But probably both. I think a little bit of both.
We have a comment here from Luann commenting on how disciplined your process and your work is. Do you consider yourself disciplined, and has your process always been this, countless hours working on the one drawing?
Yeah, it really has. My dad was a engineer, but I remember him drawing our house plans when he was designing the house he built, and I watched him at night. He would draw every cedar shake to scale on the entire building he was imagining. He didn't imagine it, it was actually drawn as if it was built. And to watch him endlessly hours drawing, it just set the standard for me, I think, back then, to see him so patiently. And inside as a kid, I'm saying, all right, Dad, we get the idea, like cedar shakes. But he would just draw everyone, and I admired that. And as I got older, I think that ethic stayed with me once I got past my impatience of youth. So, yeah.
Just check here. I think that's our last question, and we're right on the hour. So.
All right.
Gregory Hahn, by the way, is watching. He says hello.
Okay.
Let me just check on this. This was a bit of a delay.
Well, I'm glad with these months of being alone at home, not drawing, that I remember how to speak somewhat. So thank you for bearing with me today. And it's nice to be out in public actually saying something to somebody besides Ellen. So,
Well, thank you. It was fantastic.
Okay. Wishing you all the best. Bye-bye.